Thank you. Hi, everyone. Good afternoon and welcome to this session. My name is Matt Lingard and I'm chairing today, and I'm joined by Nathan and Richard, who are the presenters for this session. So just check you're in the right place before we get started. This is Building a Community Through Slack. And the format of the session, if you've not been to one so far, is it's 25 minutes in length. So about 20 minutes for Nathan and Richard to present, and then we'll save a few minutes, hopefully 5 minutes, for questions at the end. So please use the comments in the chat on the right of your screen to post any questions you've got. If you line them up, I'll keep an eye out for them. But also feel free to use the chat for comments and just to say hello to each other and so on. But I won't waste any more of Richard and Nathan's time, and I will step back and hand over to them.
Thank you very much, Matt, and welcome everyone to this session where Nathan and I are going to share some of the progress that we've been making at the University of York in developing a community space for our students. If we can move on to the next slide. Pre-COVID, really, we have done quite a lot of scoping work at the university with our student associations, thinking about a revitalised sort of digital strategy for the university. And one of the sort of key learning points in collaborating with our student associations was the importance of community building as a focus for knowledge sharing and collaboration in learning activities. So that was pretty clear to us pre-COVID, but and it also was a finding that's been shared in other work, particularly at Edinburgh University with their re-envisioning of digital learning. So we've known about the importance of digital communities in supporting that knowledge sharing for a while now, and it's also reinforced by the literature. Garrison and Anderson and their sort of views on social presence in online teaching are well established and well known. And this was all pertinent to University of York when in 2018 we launched a new portfolio of fully online programs, and those are run on a carousel delivery approach, which means that students can sort of jump on and off a carousel with 6 opportunities, entry points during an academic year when they can do that. And that presents challenges in terms of giving students a sense of program and belonging, a cohort that they belong to, as they are jumping on and off different module sites and can mix with a whole range of different students. And obviously, as we know, with the pandemic, right across the sector, one of the big learning points from that was the isolation that some learners have felt working remotely, dialing in to sort of study online, and that's been hugely disruptive to traditional patterns of education, and that's something that we've reported on previously in our own reflections on the pandemic. If we can move on. What do we know about the literature on digital communities? Well, quite a lot. Levin Wenger is probably the most cited reference on communities of practice in terms of informing how we can learn together through common interests, and De Wilde has also recently published on the scope for informal learning networks. And Haythornthwaite and Bain and Gallagher have also sort of spoken about the potential for interdisciplinary learning and networking, and this is something that's very much interested us at York as well, in terms of looking at the synergies between different programs, different departments, and different modes of learning. We've had too much in the past of a siloed learning experience with fully online learners simply interacting with themselves and not with those that are campus-based or engaging with other modes of learning practice. So these are all sort of pertinent sort of steers to our thinking on digital community. And also, intuitively, we know that through face-to-face, that socialization spaces such as sort of cafes or water cooler opportunities are really important in terms of giving students a sense of effective belonging and the motivational benefits, which are sort of are the glue which bring together a learning community. Next slide, please, Nathan. So with all of that in mind, what we've tried to do at York is address this issue of community for our fully online postgraduate learners. And we've done that by using Slack. Now, Slack is one of the new generation of team-based environments, which draws on the strengths of social media with file sharing capabilities as well. And it's a system that has already been rolled out successfully across the university for staff, which we used extensively over the pandemic period for home working and cross-team collaborations. But we've also used it prior to the pandemic for teaching, and I've reported on that at a previous OUTSE in terms of how we use that for project-based learning for our students. So there are precedents for that as well. And the affordances of a team-based environment for community, I think, are quite compelling in terms of the scope to enable students to take control, set up their own distinct sort of channels for their own purposes, for those dynamics of collaboration, dynamic sharing of information. And that's enabled through push notifications, which provides opportunities for instant problem solving and sharing of information. There's also, through the file sharing capabilities, the scope for observational learning, where you can search for and drop in on conversations from other students and learn that way as well, flexibly in your own time. So there are a lot of strengths in terms of the environment which attracted us. And we were led in using Slack by Arizona State University, which we had a number of conversations with in terms of how they had used Slack as a community tool in rolling out their fully online programs. So that was, if you like, a guide for the community building that we engaged in. But just sort of finishing off here, it's important to acknowledge that we're not advocating this presentation that Slack is the only means of doing this. Obviously, MS Teams is far more established in the UK HE sector now and could do a similar job. And we've learned only recently at the Kent conference last week, I believe, that Discord has been used as well as another type of platform to support this type of learning, and as well as the more traditional VLE discussion boards, which I think have limitations. Anyway, I'll hand over now to Nathan to talk about the research we've done on our experience rolling out Slack to postgraduate fully online students.
Okay, thanks, Richard, and hi, everyone. So talking about the pilot, what we actually did was give Slack to about 30 students in May. These were management school students. So the York Management School have online programs. As Richard said, we have a carousel model, which means 8-week terms and 6 possible starts per year. So the intake in May of this year was about 30, and they went into their own Slack channel in addition to the module that they were all studying at the time. So we did that to kind of do a kind of soft launch effectively, just to kind of proof of concept about having students using Slack for this purpose. At the end of that 8 weeks, we extended it out to all the management online students at that time, which is about 400. So we upped the numbers considerably, and they had 8 weeks using Slack in that way. Apart from the main channel, we also made one channel per module with the idea they could kind of socialize or do informal learning on their specific modules, as well as at a program level in the main channel. In terms of implementation, apart from the setup that I just explained, I mean, it was quite light touch. Essentially, we just emailed them to invite them to the workspace. We did consult with student reps to sort of get some feedback on our process. We offered usage guides for Slack as a tool. We had kind of positive messaging around community building, and there was some kind of rules of engagement in there as well, although that wasn't kind of foregrounded. So really, you know, there wasn't really any sort of hosting or facilitation. It was literally kind of giving them the tool and seeing what would happen. And we evaluated that by, you know, checking the usage data, how often was it used, and for what purposes. And then we ran a questionnaire, of which there were 16 responses, and a focus group of 4. So quite, you know, small sample size. So we have to be cautious about how we interpret the results. However, it was useful to get feedback on their experience. In terms of that usage, I mean, it was quite low, to be honest. There were 104 uses of Slack across that time period, which is rather low, of which there were 27 threads. So that shows you there were some actual conversations and interactions going on, not just individual posts. However, there were only 25 distinct users, which mean, that bears out the idea of quite low usage here, only about 6% of what was possible. As you'd expect, the type of stuff going on there were questions back and forth about the actual learning, the content, the assessments, and so on, some general social interaction. And at one point, interestingly, some students arranged to start a study group in WhatsApp. So that happened within Slack. In terms of the quantitative data from the questionnaire, when we asked the students whether they thought the university should provide a digital community space, 94% said yes, 6% said not sure. So yes, a very small sample size, but this was encouraging in terms of the students that did respond, saying that they did want such a community space. In terms of whether they wanted it to be Slack, 50% said yes, go with Slack. The other 50% either weren't sure or wanted a different platform. So that's somewhat ambivalent. There wasn't kind of overwhelming support for Slack. However, 50% said they did want to keep using it. This is the first of 3 slides where I kind of draw out themes from both the questionnaire and the focus groups. So in terms of whether they found it useful or not, yes, there were positive comments around being able to create connections across the program. However, comments around the fact that it would be useful, but there wasn't enough activity and interaction going on there. This slide shows barriers to engagement that were highlighted. So this is what students either said, these were reasons why they themselves didn't engage very much, or they thought the cohort wasn't engaging very much. First of all, a reluctance to use the new tool. That could be because of the need to manage new notifications, an actual dislike of going out to different systems rather than having everything in one place. And one student raised data protection concerns. They weren't sure about whether Slack was safe in that way. There was a general sense that some members of this cohort are quite goal orientated because they're pressed for time. So they're adult learners, most of them are working and they have care and commitments as well. So there was a sense that, perhaps this cohort in particular, a lot of them wouldn't use such a platform anyway. Also, the ones that did want to use a community platform, one of the possible limitations there was that there were already existing student-created channels on WhatsApp and Discord that are quite popular, which may have reduced traffic in the pilot channel. And lastly, they said that because there wasn't any hosting or facilitation, that could have led to the lack of engagement. So this next slide, these are ways that the students said might increase engagement or foster a successful community. First of all, that active promotion and facilitation by the students or staff, that was felt really to be needed. A fuller introduction to Slack and the benefits of using it. Clearly, because it was a pilot, we could only do that in a fairly light touch way, whereas with a greater rollout, there'd be opportunities to do it in a more thorough way. Integrating with other systems would obviously be ideal if things could be in one place. Integrating with campus communities, obviously there's the actual physical other students being around them, however, in a department, there's a community as well, so kind of information about events and so on. So it's not just the physical campus community, it's what's going on within departments and perhaps the colleges and the other sort of informal networks around the university. There was a suggestion that it should be implemented as part of a wider strategy. And in fact, we do have a wider strategy to try and increase the sense of community at our university. So it would fit with that. There should be a kind of attention paid to the ongoing benefits, such as alumni links, professional networking, and possibly incorporating alumni talks to kind of enhance the value of the space. And there's the possibility that if wider university support services were run in Slack, that would increase traffic on the platform. Now, interestingly, points 6 and 7, we do know happen at Arizona State University for their on-campus and online programs. So those are 2 things that we were already thinking about. So I'm going to hand back to Richard now for our sort of conclusion slide.
Okay, so what have we learned from this initial pilot? Well, I think the first point is probably unsurprising, but build it, and they won't necessarily come. What we've learned is that you can provide additional tools, but unless there's a sort of a clear driver for students to engage, then you can assume nothing. And I'm sort of drawn to the work of Sanchez et al. In their review of academic use of Facebook, where they've highlighted the importance of social influence, actually getting social influencers to drive adoption of a particular tool. In the case of the Sanchez study, it was Facebook groups and their use of for academic adoption. But clearly, this is all pointing us to the need for a wider engagement strategy to get students on board and to develop a sort of thriving community. And the challenge here, particularly for the use case that we have been describing here, are full-time, professional workers who are engaged in flexible learning, a master's program. They are sort of time poor, and the capacity for peer interaction wouldn't necessarily be sort of extensive. So, and the added complication of these multiple sort of starts, so this lack of coherence with a cohort. So these are all barriers which potentially could be obstacles to student engagement in a thriving community. So what we need to think about moving forward, and our plan is to roll out this Slack environment to all our postgraduate taught students, and this is work that's in progress now, is to work in partnership with our student associations and actually get them to take an active role in the modelling and the socialization of students. And that might be by putting on sort of initial activities which get people into the system, and then they can start to see the potential for it to develop the synergies across programs. And I'm quite drawn by the thinking of Stephen Verjans and Raja Gopal, who talked about this sort of concept of a third space. So you've got the formal learning environment, which is university controlled environment managed by staff. You've got informal, which are the spaces off-site, which are controlled by students. And then there's this third space where we're working with students, empowering them to actually manage it and use that as a bridge for community building. And that's how we see the future of Slack moving forward. So that's our vision, and over the next academic year we'll be rolling this out and hopefully driving sort of greater adoption of this space for our fully online and our traditional postgraduate students. And what we hope to see is a synergy between these different communities as they share practice and share common research interest. And we've got a particular drive towards interdisciplinary collaborations, and it'll be exciting to see how that plays out. So that concludes the presentation. I don't know if Nathan, you want to just sort of click on and just show the links to the references, but we'll make this presentation available on SlideShare for you and TweetBack. But Matt, I don't know if there are any sort of questions we'd like to pick up.
Yeah, thank you guys. Thanks very much. And we'll make sure the slides are shared for sure. So we've had a couple of questions come in, although Puyin wasn't sure whether hers was a question, but it certainly turned into a question partway through her typing. So I'll let you guys read that and then you can come back.
Okay, we'll start from the bottom up. Slack and discourse type platforms can look very overwhelming at first, probably needs careful introduction and community building. So I think that's a very fair comment to start with. And I think that sort of plays into the whole engagement strategy and modeling of behavior. There's also, with any new platform, I think a sense of exposure to start with and fear, which you have to sort of get over. And that's by having social influencers, if you like, who can sort of take the lead and encourage students. I think that's a way forward. But in terms of a training side of things, through my own research with final year biology students, the focus groups that are around with them, the key message was how intuitive it was and how active they were with social media of different types anyway. Prior to engaging with Slack. So I think once you get over that initial hurdle and can actually see the value of Slack as a place for discourse and for community building, then things flow from there.
Right, thanks, Richard. I'll just take you back to Puyin's question. Oh, no, actually, as Tim's has gone up first. Pian's question, which is on the screen now, and if you're looking in the comments, it's at the fourth from end.
Well, Tim has asked, what specific Slack functions did students dislike? I don't know if Nathan, you'd like to respond to that.
Yeah, I mean, we're obviously the ability to create their own channels. That's been perceived to be a good thing. However, it just didn't really get going. There wasn't momentum for people to be doing that, and I do wonder when it becomes kind of student owned, and it might feel like it's not just people from the centre of the university sort of pushing it out, that they might start doing that. I mean, at the moment, I just say the general functionality they're commenting is better than what they're saying in the VLE discussion board, because clearly that if that was done, you could just park it in a module and say this is your community space. You would lose obviously some of the benefits of Slack and similar tools.
Yeah. And Puyan's raised a question about the danger of a two-tier system. Some students communicate via traditional platforms only like VLE, and some by Slack. I think the key driver here is that within the VLE, and for these fully online students, they were using, by the way, Canvas by Instructure. The scope for discussion is very much module based, and that's a sort of a feature of the, as I say, this carousel sort of approach. There isn't a natural program space for students to come together. So where discussion is taking place within the formal learning environment Canvas, then it is very module content focused. And I guess what we need to convey in a more compelling fashion is what Slack is for, which is opening up vistas for discussion and idea sharing beyond the module and the immediate sort of priorities of assessment and the challenges of the module, and actually sort of looking at, maybe for the independent sort of study side of things, for scope for shared research interests there, maybe for more professional employability, skills-based sharing of practice. That's what it's for, and it's compelling that message, getting that across, and I think which is going to be our challenge.
Right, thank you, Richard. There's no more questions in the chat, but I was just thinking about one myself, actually, just in terms of, and apologies if I did miss it in the talk, but are you using Slack as with a contract with Slack in any way, or are students just being directed to the free version and signing up with their own accounts and things?
It's the paid version they've been offered. Yeah, and we had that for staff, and we had spare licenses to try pilot with students.
Right. Okay.
But the wider rollout to students is the paid version as well.
Yeah. Okay.
I mean, I had one final thought that I might put out there, if that's all right, if there's no more questions. I mean, from this conference, other people have talked about community, and what I've really picked up on is that, okay, if you're going to provide a community space, you can just build it and see if they come, and that's an option we're kind of cautioning against. I think there are other things you can do. I've seen people entwining it quite a lot with learning and actually almost making it inseparable from the learning and teaching that goes on. And I think that's one approach to drive engagement. I've also seen the peer assisted mentoring or thing that was presented earlier from Derby. So doing some other kind of initiative and hooking that into a community space is another way. And another way is just trying to kind of drive engagement through active student participation and student groups, which is what we're trying. And I think that's one of the takeaways I'd recommend people take from this, that you probably do need to do something else rather than just build it and see if they come, as Richard said.
Yeah.
But one final comment, Tim's asked about the fact that students like back channels, Facebook, WhatsApp for discussion, and I don't see a contradiction here. What we did see during our trial was some students using Slack initially to meet, form groups, and then jump off to go to WhatsApp groups for private sort of or more niche discussions, and that's fine, and that shows the overlap, if you like, the porous boundaries between, if you like, a second space, a private space, and a third space, this bridging concept that we're talking about. So they can be complementary.
Yeah, I don't see that as a problem. I think that's just where they wanted to talk at that time. Hypothetically, if there'd been a fuller introduction and they'd know they could have made their own channel, which they may not have even known, maybe they'd have done it in Slack. However, that's just what they wanted to do. And in a way, the Slack channel might have facilitated that. So I actually think that's kind of a benefit.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I agree with that. And everybody will be different as well in terms of different individual students and groups of students in how they adapt and manage the combination of these tools. So thank you very much, gents. I think we're at the end of our time, actually, so that's bang on. So it just remains for me to thank you both for speaking today and for the time we know that goes into preparing these things and indeed submitting to come to the conference in the first place. So thank you very much, much appreciated. Thanks for your time, and thanks to everybody who took the time to come and engage with the session today. Good afternoon, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you very much. Yeah.